Been wanting to dive into this one with you guys. Now, the name Glen Scotia may not be as well known to some like their fellow Campbeltown neighbor Springbank, but Glen Scotia has a long history of high quality spirits and incredibly good fortune. Their 15-year-old sub $100 single malt scotch is one of my favorite go-to whiskeys. Let's find out why. It's What's on the Shelf Wednesday. Welcome back to the Mash and Drum. I am Jason C, and this is What's on the Shelf Wednesday, the series where I bring you quick reviews of whiskeys you can actually find on the shelf, including bourbons, ryes, scotches, Irish whiskeys, and more. Be sure to like, subscribe, and thank you all for the support, WhiskeyTube family. So a little bit about Glen Scotia. They're based in Campbeltown, and they've been pretty much working hard to make their spirits and put their region back on the map. The history of the brand is tied to the history of Campbeltown itself, a region that once had a distillery on nearly every single corner. But as Campbeltown's fortunes went up and down, so too did Glen Scotia's. So the Kintyre Peninsula, where Campbeltown is situated in Scotland, was a distiller's paradise with ample supply of all the necessary ingredients you need to make whiskey. Barley, peat, plenty of fuel, and most importantly, a supply of clear, fresh water, which were all available locally. Now, since at least the early 1600s, distillers have been operating in that region, with the first license for production issued back in 1609. Now, by the end of 1795, there were at least 31 documented illicit stills up and running in the area in and around Campbeltown. Now, at the height of Campbeltown's whiskey production, steamships brought bottles of spirits directly to Glasgow in just 9 hours. Now, in 1835, 29 distilleries were thriving in the area, but the boom would not last. Then that wonderful time in the 1920s came along, which proved to be kind of the death blow to the area. The Great Depression and Prohibition in the US had greatly reduced sales, and at the end of 1929, only 3 of those original distilleries remained: Reclocken, Springbank, and Scotia. It wasn't Glen Scotia yet, but by March 20th, 1930, Scotia was forced to close its doors for the next 3 years. Fortunately, the dry spell didn't last too long. In 1933, the Bloch brothers bought the facility and reopened it with the updated Glen Scotia name. And by 1934, Reclocken closed, leaving Campbeltown with only 2 remaining distilleries: Springbank and Glen Scotia. Now, for the next 60 years, those 2 remaining distilleries pretty much survived and did well. But in 1984, Glen Scotia closed again for the first time in 5 years. But in 1989, the distillery opened once again under ownership by the Gibsons. As demand for whiskey grew, Glen Scotia thrived, changing hands to the current team, owned now by Loch Lomond. Since then, Campbeltown has began to reestablish itself as a major whiskey producing region after almost 100 years. In 2000, the Glengyle Distillery reopened, bringing the total number of local distilleries back up to 3 for the first time in 60 years. Now, with such a crazy history, what happened to the whiskey? So you might be surprised to learn that Glen Scotia really hasn't changed too much about the way they make whiskey over the years. In fact, the mash tun, the still room, and even the dunnage warehouse date back to the 1830s. So they're really big on history. One of the few changes has been that instead of malting their own barley, they now buy their barley from elsewhere in Scotland. However, all the purchased barley is malted to Glen Scotia's exact specifications to ensure a true Glen Scotia character shines through on their whiskey. Which brings us to the 15-year, which I'm gonna pour now. So Glen Scotia 15 is matured exclusively for 15 years in American oak, so basically ex-bourbon. It is non-chill filtered, bottled at 46% ABV or 92 proof. It's priced at about $85, which is a bargain for anything from Campbeltown these days with this type of age. Considering Springbank 15 is about $250, the Glen Scotia looks like that much more of a bargain. Let's dive into it. First thing I get on the nose here is like chocolate covered pretzel with like salt on it, like salted chocolate covered pretzel, which is just an amazing note. There's that little like Campbeltown funkiness to it. Now, if you've never tried anything from Campbeltown, there was something known as the Campbeltown funk, which, you know, can be described in a few different ways. It can be something tangy, something salty, kind of an overripe fruit with, you know, this influence of like a dunnage type of warehouse. But there's a lot of bourbon influence. That caramel, that vanilla that you get from a, you know, from a bourbon cask definitely shines through here. Again, it's not overly powerful. Now, I did just say dunnage warehouse. A dunnage warehouse, while traditional to Campbeltown, is actually much different than your typical bourbon rickhouse in Kentucky. A dunnage warehouse is actually a lot smaller in comparison. It is only tall enough to stack around 3 barrels and is created to provide really the best air circulation for those aging casks. These warehouses are usually built with a slate roof, stone walls, and the floor is just basically earth. The barrels are literally stacked on top of each other, 3 high. It's believed that to make that Campbeltown character or that Campbeltown funk, between the floor maltings, the specific mash tuns, wooden washbacks, and smaller stills, all contributes to that like thicker, oily mouthfeel known as the Campbeltown funk. If you guys have never tried it before, this might be a good way to try it without, you know, overpaying a ton of money to get a Springbank. So as I mentioned, kind of like a chocolate covered salted pretzel. Now a lot of caramel. I'm always getting like a slight hint of butterscotch here too. Again, big heavy influence here, I think, from the bourbon cask. All right, let's go for a try. Here we go. On the palate, it is oily, and I think that's what gives Campbeltown like that signature that you know, Scotch lovers chase. So it's thick, it's rich, it's oily, even at only, you know, 92 proof, which is kind of surprising. But yeah, all those ex-bourbon, you know, factors really come in. You get the vanilla, some caramel, a little bit of butterscotch. You know, there is a maltiness quality to it. Obviously, it is a single malt, so you get some honey, you get a little bit of like a toast, like a toasted, like you just threw a little toast in the toaster, and it kind of comes out. It's a little bit crispy. It's got like that little bit of a dryness characteristic to it, you know, from the barley. But it's also very fruit forward as well once it hits mid palate. So at 92 proof, the beauty of this single malt is all in the front mid palate. You're not going to get much of a finish on here. There is a little bit, you know, with that little, you know, hint of smoky and breadiness to it. Like I was saying, like that little bit of like a burnt toast character. But up front, like that chocolate salted pretzel with like vanilla, caramel, and butterscotch is just all there. The finish actually lingers a little bit on the back of the palate, which is kind of nice. Again, not overly, you know, powerful, being only 92 proof. But I think this is, I really want to do a video on this because I feel like, you know, if you're a bourbon drinker, and maybe you've heard of some of your friends talk about Campbeltown and Springbank and how popular some of those offerings are, and maybe you don't want to spend the money to get a Springbank, because a Springbank, like I said, Springbank 15 is like a $300 bottle, you know, pretty much, but when, you know, when all said and done with tax and everything. But Glen Scotia 15 allows you to taste something from Campbeltown to see, you know, if it's a region you want to try more of, for less than $100 to get, you know, to get this bottle. This one is pretty much everywhere I go. I see it everywhere. I always forget how much I love to sip on this bottle, especially when I'm in the mood for single malt. You know, I'm not drinking Bunnahabhain or Bruichladdich, which is my other 2 favorite distillers. Again, it's a little bit fruity, it's a little bit sweet. It's not overly sweet. It does come off as a little bit malty, but that chocolate pretzel note I absolutely love on the front of the palate. I think this is an absolutely great intro for any bourbon drinker or just anyone looking to try anything from Campbeltown, because I think the flavors are here, that oiliness is there. You could experience the Campbeltown funk a little bit for less than $100, and it's widely available. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this review on What's on the Shelf Wednesdays. We took a look at Glen Scotia. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that subscribe button below. Please hit the like button. If you haven't yet, follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter. Let me know if you enjoyed this one down in the comments. As always, love to hear from you guys. I think this is, you know, a great way to get introduced to Campbeltown. As I mentioned, there are some single casks out there that independent bottlers do, like the SMWS, Scotch Malt Whisky Society. And there's just, you know, so many good variations of Glen Scotia out there in the market. So with all that said, like I always say, it's not about the whiskey, it's the people you share it with. Cheers, and go try some Campbeltown funk. It's good stuff. Cheers.